So when we're talking about the world of the court system, there's one big division, which is between the criminal law side and the civil law side. The criminal side is like it sounds. It's people being charged with crimes and they're being prosecuted by a county or a state or a city prosecutor. And the consequence is some fine or going to jail. That's the criminal law side. The civil law side is everything else. And within the civil law side, there's one part that's basically what some people call family law. So divorces, adoptions, annulments, domestic violence situations where someone needs to get a temporary protective order. A lot of those fall under the family law label. And then the rest we sometimes fondly refer to as civil litigation. Civil litigation can include business disputes like the ones our office handles, people collecting on a promissory note, breach of contract, partnership disputes. It can also include personal injury matters. So if someone is involved in a serious collision or other accident and they suffer personal injuries, then in some instances they may file lawsuits to recover for those injuries. It can involve intentional behavior such as fraud or even an assault in a bar fight. It can involve statutory type remedies, like there's a Fair Debt Collection Act. There are other statutory remedies for people who are complaining that their credit report wasn't handled properly, or that they're the victim of a fraud or consumer fraud. All those things fall under the umbrella of civil litigation. So when you're in court in a civil matter, then there is a process for working through your civil matter. Now, the one thing I want to emphasize, which is not great, is that you really, as a practical matter, do all the work and incur all the expense at the front end, and you don't get a decision or even feedback until the very end. So that's part of the process. You don't get a lot of early feedback on the merits of your case, and you have a lot of uncertainty all the way to the end. The process is that a lawsuit is started, and it's started usually by filing a complaint. And then that complaint is personally served on your defendant. They get a summons and complaint, and then they answer the complaint, or they make a motion. And once the answer is filed, then there's an exchange of information. We call that discovery. You get to ask the other side questions. They get to ask you questions, that are to be filled out in writing. You provide documentation supporting or relevant to your claim. The other side does the same. You get to testify under oath in a deposition, and other witnesses may also testify under oath in a deposition. It goes forward. That discovery process is a big part of the case. And then towards the end, usually you'll see a motion or two asking the judge to rule preliminarily, or to rule just based on the papers. And if a judge looks at that and says, well, I can make a decision and we don't need a jury for this, then there will be a quick decision. Usually the judge will defer and say, hey, this needs to go in front of a jury, which is the last step of the litigation process. And that's called a trial. Sometimes it's called a hearing. And guess what? After the trial or the hearing and the jury renders their verdict, there's a time for appeal. So the loser can take an appeal to the appellate court and keep the process going. So it's not glamorous, but there is a process for resolving disputes. And then your goal, of course, is to make as much headway as you can and get out of the litigation process as fast as you can. As a practical matter, the courts are going to handle discovery in a case by giving the parties considerable latitude. There's going to be a lot of exchange of information. Anytime that one complains, to the court about how much information they're required to give, the judge is usually going to say, well, you got to give more information. And there can be a lot of sidetracking disputes in discovery that may seem relevant to the case and don't always move the case forward. There's a lot of opportunity for bickering that is not as productive. So needless to say, the court process is a pretty time and money intensive process and a laborious process. And I would say that about 97% of civil cases are decided prior to trial for that reason. And especially because you don't really have a way to contain your risk and you don't get feedback on the quality of your case or your defense until the very end. So the parties are left to figure it out during the process. I would say that the most common resolution is that when the attorneys are in communication and exchanging settlement offers, the parties are able to negotiate a resolution on their own. That's the most common. The second most common is that the parties attempt to negotiate an outcome on their own, are unsuccessful, and so they turn to a mediator or a settlement conference presided over by a judge, and they get some outside assistance of someone who will come in and will give you their feedback on the case. They'll say your case sucks or their case sucks. Usually, that's an interesting scenario because that mediator will come into your room and say, you're going to lose in court, so you better settle. And then they'll turn around, go to the other side, go to their room and say, you're going to lose, and so you better settle. So nevertheless, that's a common way to resolve the lawsuit. And then the rest, they go all the way to the trial preparation. They go to the eve of trial and either the first day of trial, and finally someone comes to their senses and says, this is nuts, and let's resolve that. Of course, at that point, you've already spent a lot of money, and so it feels a little bit more forced then. And then those who don't just go ahead and finish the trial, and they get their verdict from either the judge or from the jury, and they either live with it or they appeal it. So being involved in any way in the civil litigation process is going to be life-changing. You're never going to forget the time you were involved in a lawsuit. It's a big deal in your life. And if you have any questions about that process, especially if you're contemplating entering into the process or trying to find a way out of the process, give us a call at the Sierra Crest Business Law Group.